If I were to ask you what your favorite Spider-Man game was, chances are you'd say Spider-Man 2. Yes, I know the web slinging is perfect, yes, I know the city is amazing, and yes, I know it's probably one of the best movie licensed games ever, even though it doesn't really have much competition. While the web slinging is great, it seems to be the one part of the game everyone talks about. Outside the city and the web swinging, Spider-Man 2 is still good, but it wasn't anything special. I still think it's a great game, as a ton of effort went into it, but to say it's the best Spider-Man game is taking it a bit far. I personally think Web of Shadows and Shattered Dimensions are better story-wise and gameplay-wise. Out of all the Spider-Man games, though, there's one that no one really talks about, and that's Ultimate Spider-Man, developed by Treyarch and released in 2005, a year after Spider-Man 2, so it had a lot to live up to. As you can probably imagine, this game is set in the Ultimate Universe, which tends to be a more realistic depiction of Spider-Man. Several villains are also changed dramatically, such as Rhino, Shocker, and the Green Goblin, who's a Hulk-like creature that shoots fireballs. Bet you didn't see that one coming, did you? But before we move on, let's talk about Spider-Man himself. What exactly makes Spider-Man such a popular superhero? He isn't the strongest, noblest, or even the most exciting. It's the fact that Spider-Man is relatable. Superman is an incredibly powerful alien, Iron Man is a rich genius that creates a high-tech suit of armor, and Underdog is, well, a dog. Spider-Man isn't any of these things, and that's what makes him so special. What would a normal teenager do if he suddenly had superhuman abilities? How would he deal with it? The comics heavily dealt with these challenges, however the game doesn't really do that. Ultimate Spider-Man is an action game, its story isn't very deep, and the majority of the game focuses mostly on boss battles and thug fighting. To briefly sum up the setup of the game, Richard Parker and Eddie Brock Sr. were trying to create a cure for cancer in the form of the Venom suit. Boulevard Trask then buys the Venom suit from Richard Parker and Eddie Brock Sr. to use for evil or something. But before Trask can take it, Spider-Man steals it, uses it, realizes it's killing him, and takes it back only to have Eddie Brock Jr. take it for himself. The game is an original story set several months after the events of the Venom storyline from the comics, where Peter Parker fights Venom and he escapes. The first thing you'll notice about this game is its art style. The look of the characters and their surroundings make parts of the game that would normally be boring, like dialogue for instance, stimulating, especially if you're like me and have a 5-second attention span. Speaking of dialogue, there are times when the voice acting here is outstanding, and there are other times where it's abysmal.
You think just because you can fly in a streak of fire, ooh, you can beat me?
I do believe that's what I'm saying.
I guess it's still better than Spider-Man 2's dialogue, though.
There's some kind of gunfight happening over there.
Surrender immediately.
Eat lead.
Luckily, the combat is consistently smooth. You have your standard punches and kicks, and you can chain them together in different combinations. Spidey also takes fall damage. Kinda. One of the weirdest things that this game does with combat is that when you knock an enemy out, you have to run up to them and web them to the ground so they don't get back up. This mechanic could work in a different game, but I feel like it doesn't work here. Half the time, you can't even lock onto the enemy to tie them to the ground, as the targeting system just kinda does its own thing. As long as you deal with the guys one at a time, you shouldn't have too much trouble with this mechanic. Now on to the most important part of any Spider-Man game, the web slinging. So how is it? Pains me to say this, but the web slinging, it's just not as good as Spider-Man 2. I honestly can't explain it. The web swinging here looks better than Spider-Man 2 as it's much less choppy, but it just doesn't feel right. I think it might have something to do with the camera, much like the aforementioned targeting system. The camera does its own thing. And even with the multiple additions to the web slinging, such as boost and web climbing, which I don't know the purpose of, can't save it from feeling off. Spider-Man 2 swinging also felt realistic, and it was kind of difficult to pull off absolutely perfectly. But Ultimate Spider-Man swinging is incredibly easy to pull off, and it kind of feels floaty. It's still better than the Amazing Spider-Man's web slinging, but then again, so is anything. Anyway, let's move on to the story. We see a day in the life of Peter Parker. He goes to school, he's dating Mary Jane, he stops criminals, and that's about it. After several sections of gameplay, you get these things called city goals. These are easily the worst part of the game. They require you to stop a few street crimes and do either a race or a combat tour, which are basically you fighting waves of enemies, to proceed to the next mission. I feel like these city goals shouldn't be required, as they feel like padding to make the game seem even longer than it actually is. This wouldn't surprise me at all if it was true though, because the game isn't that long in the first place. I've beaten this game probably about 7 times before, and me playing it for this review, I beat it in about 4 hours. Anyway, after accomplishing these, we can move on to the next mission where we play as Venom, Oh yeah, I should probably mention that. You can play as Venom! Venom has a very significant part in the story as Eddie Brock is struggling with a symbiote. The game does a great job of portraying Venom as a monster, which is actually how I personally prefer him. It could be that Spider-Man 3 ruined my idea of Venom being straight up evil, but a certain short film called Truth in Journalism, which you should all go watch, does a perfect job of showing the pure evil that Venom is. The most unique thing Venom has to offer here is the way his health works. With Spider-Man, you can get health pickups, but with Venom, his health is constantly depleting, forcing you to eat pedestrians alive. Unfortunately, due to the teen rating, the dead bodies that the symbiotes eat in this game look unharmed, but trust me, in the comics, it's a different story. Venom has two different attacks, one where he attacks with his claws, and another where he hits people with his tentacles. Instead of web swinging, he also does the super high jump, which is cool and all, but it can be a burden when you're trying to do a chase mission. Anyways, Venom fights Wolverine, then Spider-Man fights Rhino, and then Venom is kidnapped by Trask Industries, and then you realize that this game has a ton of bosses. I'm not even kidding, there are 14 boss fights in this game, and all of them have the same strategy for the most part. Just mash buttons and punch them until they go down. Spider-Man 2 had 4 different bosses, and all of them were completely unique, so I guess there's another thing it did better, huh? Well, you keep using that strategy until you fight Electro. My god. Not only is the pre-chase with Electro annoying enough with him taunting you,
Come on, pick up the pace. Moving on up. My grandma moves faster than you. You gotta keep up, boy. I thought this was a chase, not a freaking walk in the park.
but the boss fight with him proves just how awful the camera actually is. I knew a ton of people that owned this game as a kid, and most of them gave up once they got to Electro because he was just too hard.
So did you ever play Ultimate Spider-Man as a kid?
Yes, I did.
Did you ever beat Electro?
You kidding me?
So did you ever play Ultimate Spider-Man as a kid?
Hell no, that's for dorks.
Did you ever beat Electro?
An electrode?
The basic gist of this boss battle is that while Venom is chasing Electro, Spider-Man comes by and gets knocked out by Electro. So now Venom has to protect Spider-Man because he wants to be the one that kills Spidey or something like that. The fight starts out in Times Square, which is pretty cool, and the first part of the fight is pretty easy. But just when you think you've won, Electro absorbs some more energy and turns blue. Now he cannot be damaged by just attacking him. You have to either throw a car at him to knock him down or hit a fire hydrant. And when Electro's health gets too low, he absorbs more health from another sign in Times Square. You can stop him from doing this by having Venom throw cars at these signs to destroy them before Electro can use them. The problem is that Venom is too slow to avoid Electro's attacks and he's too inaccurate. Like as I mentioned before, the targeting system does its own thing. And I don't know how many of you know this, but Times Square has a lot of electronic signs. You have to get rid of them all. The best way to handle this fight is to just throw cars all over the place and hope they hit something. And try to avoid Electro. It certainly doesn't help that I got a weird glitch where Electro became both invisible and invincible though. Moving on though, the game does pick up with a great fight against Beetle and Green Goblin respectively. Eventually you'll get a boss battle with Silver Sable where you have to fight her as Peter Parker without web shooters. This boss is probably the most challenging boss in the game if you take out the crap that was the Electro fight. Silver Sable will block most of your attacks, and you really have to be smart about when you attack her and for how long. After your fight with her, you get your Spider-Man costume back and you have to chase Venom. I suppose I should talk a bit about the chases now since they are a pretty big part of the game. Most of the bosses in this game have a chase sequence, and I really wasn't a big fan of any of them. I mentioned before that Venom chases can be annoying because his jump sometimes will cost you the level on account of it being way too inaccurate and way too high. Spider-Man's chases are much more plentiful, but they are so much easier. In fact, they are way too easy and kind of boring. All you do is web swing or web zip after the bad guys until they fight you in a boss battle, and that's it. But anyway, Spidey fights Venom on the streets only to be captured alongside Venom by Trask Industries. Spider-Man wakes up only to forcibly have the Carnage symbiote attached to him. Carnage breaks loose and then fights Venom. This boss battle is actually one of my favorites. It's difficult, yet incredibly fun to be able to fight Spider-Man, kinda. After the fight, Venom absorbs the Carnage suit along with the extra DNA that it gathered from Spider-Man to give Brock total control over the suit. And the cool emblem on his chest. Venom goes after a fleeing Trask only to have Spider-Man try and stop him. Spider-Man beats Venom one final time, learns the truth about his parents, and is apparently completely oblivious to the fact that Venom has escaped once again.
Eddie's not here. He was gone before we showed up.
After you beat the main storyline, you unlock Venom as a playable character to free roam with whenever you want and to do extra challenges such as Venom races and stuff. Ultimate Spider-Man is a fantastic action game, but how does it rank compared to the others? I'd personally say it's somewhere in the middle. I loved this game as a kid, but upon playing it recently, I really don't think it holds up that much. There are no upgrades, the controls are simple, the story is simple, and there are plenty other things that are just annoying. With that said, the game is worth playing just for the wonderfully done art style and the well done cutscenes. I would say that playing as Venom is pretty cool as well, but I honestly enjoyed playing as Spider-Man more, probably just because Venom is a bit too slow and can be hard to control sometimes. What I never really understood is that this game never got a sequel. I definitely think it deserves one, even though the whole Miles Morales thing is over with. I'd definitely be fine with a sequel starring Miles Morales instead of Peter Parker. I think that would work really well, but I guess that's just wishful thinking. But, I mean, really, this game just takes me back. I loved this game as a kid, and, you know, it really makes me want to clap.
Clap your hands for Spider-Man. He's the coolest superhero in the land. He can do things that no one can. So clap your hands for Spider-Man. If you see him walking down the street, clap your hands for Spider-Man. He's the bravest man you'll ever meet. Clap your hands for Spider-Man. Clap your hands for Spider-Man. He's the coolest superhero in the land. He can do things that no one can. So clap your hands for Spider-Man. If you see him climbing.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching my video and putting up with that ending. It means a lot to me. You can click right there to go to my channel trailer if you're new. This way you just know the way I do my channel around here. I've also got more reviews. You can follow me on Twitter. I have a second channel where I post random stupid videos. So thanks for watching, and special thanks to everyone who clapped their hands for Spider-Man, especially the guys over at Screwattack.com, so go check them out. And I'll see you guys next time.
You have no idea what's going on.